Before this video begins, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my channel members, who you can see on screen now. Become a member by hitting the join button and get your name here among other awards today. Hello there and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are taking a look at some more of the modern muscle cars. We begin with the 2018 Ford Mustang RTR Spec 5 road car. 460 horsepower, 420 foot-pound torque, 3,827 pounds of weight. The only road-going version of the post-facelift Ford Mustang that we have in the game. The RTR Spec 5 is a pretty interesting vehicle. Essentially, RTR takes your Mustang, puts this bigger body kit on it with the wider fenders. You get those signature awesome grille lights, you get bigger wheels, and you also get some slight changes to the performance of your car. However, it's not a massive difference. The RTR Mustang, I sort of equate it similar to the Roush Mustangs. They weren't necessarily overpowered, and this isn't even 460 horsepower. That's not much more than the standard Mustang GT V8 produces on its own. Also, one thing to note about this car, it has the 10-speed automatic gearbox, which means the gear changes are incredibly quick, and the gear ratios are very, very good. As far as it goes to drive, it is just very, very good. A little bit wayward. If you are expecting this to handle a bit like a baby GT350R, you've come down the wrong track. Essentially, what you get with the RTR Spec 5 is a slightly improved version of the standard Mustang GT. It is quicker than a standard Mustang GT, it handles a little bit better, but it isn't quite as good as the GT350R. Next up, a very old school muscle car, the 2012 Dodge Challenger SRT8, 470 horsepower, 470 foot-pound torque, 4,160 pounds of weight. This is the heaviest car we have here today, and if you like your muscle cars antiquated, then the RTR is not for you, and instead I would recommend this, the Challenger. The Challenger has been with us since 2008 and still continues on to this day. This is just a sort of normal SRT8, none of that Hellcat stuff, which we have had go around the course before, and boy do I remember the Hellcat Dodge products. I was sort of hoping the SRT8 would be a little bit better than the Hellcat, however, I was wrong. This is the muscle car for you, again, if you are a huge fan of the original muscle cars, the Challengers, the Chargers from the 60s and the 70s, because it kind of drives like those. It drives very old. Granted, okay, the suspension's a little bit more salted. It turns in a little bit nicer, but in general it just feels floaty, the rear end really likes to come out, it understeers. This is not a good handling car. This is not one of those muscle cars that you get into like the new Camaros or Mustangs and you think, wow, these are really good, you know, they're almost sports cars now. The Challenger is not that. The Challenger is, I guess, the only real true muscle car America has left, and boy can you tell. Speaking of Camaros, the 2002 Chevrolet Camaro 35th anniversary, 325 horsepower, 350 foot-pound torque, 3,554 pounds of weight. Of course, a little bit of an older Camaro here. We have had the Z28 go round, I believe, before, so this is what we're left with. This episode is a little bit of a mismatch of stuff that isn't quite what you'd call modern, but ignore it, it's relatively modern. And this is indeed a relatively modern Camaro, the final generation of the original run of Camaros, I guess, before they revitalized it on the Holden platform. This is colloquially named as the Catfish Camaro, which I always thought was kind of a cute name for it, and it does kind of look like a catfish. I actually quite like this model of Camaro, probably my second favourite after the IROC. Which is my personal favourite. I say IROC, the third generation Camaro, this is a fourth generation Camaro. As far as this goes to drive, well, it's another one of those weird Chevrolets. I spoke about this before with cars like the C4 Corvette. For whatever reason, these sort of mid-90s to early 2000s Chevrolets seem to handle ridiculously well. And I'm never quite sure why, and this is one of those. It's a really excellent handling car, this 35th anniversary Camaro. Yeah, probably the best handling thing here today, which you shouldn't really be saying about a 17-year-old Camaro. Anyways, another GM product, the 2011 Cadillac CTS-V Coupe, 556 horsepower, 551 foot-pound torque, 3,931 pounds of weight. This is, interestingly, lighter than the Challenger. Yeah. Anyways, most powerful car we have here today, and the torquiest car we have here today, the CTS-V A muscle car for the slightly more sophisticated, I guess, although not by much considering the interiors of these things. Yeah, Cadillac sort of entered the muscle car world with the original CTS-V in 2004, which was a rather spectacular car, even if, again, cheap GM interior. The CTS has continued on ever since. This is a second-gen CTS, and this is when they decided to make it into a coupe for some reason. I don't know why. You could get the saloon, you could get the wagon, but the coupe was a thing they sold. It's a hideous abomination. As far as it goes to drive, well, how do you expect a 556 horsepower sort of luxury barge with a muscle car rocket engine in it? Yeah, it doesn't handle great. I would recommend the newer CTS-V, although none of the CTS-Vs have been particularly great driving cars when it comes to Forza. If you want good handling, I would avoid them at all costs. Next up, our first Australian car, but by no means our last today, the 2011 HSV Commodore GTS. 457 horsepower, 405 foot-pound torque, 4,068 pounds of weight. Another Commodore takes on the track. We've got quite a few of these in the game, as you'd expect, whether they be from HSV or Holden themselves, or indeed HDT. There is a lot of Commodores, lots of Australian muscle to go round. This particular HSV, I'm kind of in two minds about. I kind of like the fact that it looks ridiculous. However, at the same time, it might be a little bit too ridiculous to me. I'm not quite sure on the grille. The exhaust situation at the back's a little bit too much. It does come in some fantastic colours. I will be honest, this car is very, very good on the colour front. But yeah, not quite sure on the styling. As far as it goes to drive, the way I've got this written down is it's fine, but it's kind of forgettable. In the sea of muscle cars, there are better handling muscle cars. There are more fun muscle cars. This kind of sits as a gloopy sort of middle ground, which isn't particularly one way or the other. Again, it's fine, it's serviceable. If you like this version of Commodore, then you'll have no issues with it. However, for me personally, there's just not all that much exciting going on. I'd probably go for the later Commodores, when they've got a little bit more drama and finesse to them. Next up, something entirely different. The 2010 Ford Crown Victoria, 250 horsepower, 297 foot-pound torque, 4,057 pounds of weight. I guess you could argue it's not really a muscle car. However, it has a V8 at the front, it has rear-wheel drive at the back, and it's about as sophisticated as a mailbox, so I class it as a muscle car for the purposes of today. It is worth pointing out this is the Police Interceptor Crown Victoria, the one that essentially sealed off the Crown Vic. I've always loved the Crown Victoria for whatever reason. I think it's a really cool looking car. I kind of wish we had more of them in the game. I wish we had the Mercury Marauder, which was a fantastic machine. Go look that up if you want. A 302 horsepower all aluminium V8. Crazy vehicle. Got 5 mpg. Fantastic. Yeah, this one's not that. This is slightly more civilized. Being a Police Interceptor version. This was when they stopped making them for civilian use, and then by 2012 the Crown Victoria was dead overall. As far as it goes to drive, well, I mean, it rolls a lot, is something apparent. It doesn't really have enough power to get itself into too much trouble, although, well, I mean, I say that, 250 horsepower is not bad. The problem is it goes through a 4-speed automatic gearbox, so that power does not go down very well at all. The gearbox is horrific on this thing, like Jeep Grand Wagoneer bad. Modified, it's huge fun. In its stock form, not quite. Next up, 1992 Ford Falcon GT, 268 horsepower, 310 foot-pound torque, 3,631 pounds of weight. I'm not 100% certain, however, I will just punt this out there. I believe this is based on the Fox body platform. It certainly looks like a Fox body Mustang, this version of the Falcon, and I quite like it. I think it looks better than a Fox body Mustang. In fact, the Falcon's always been a bit of a weird one for me. I know it's an Australian staple, and I know the Australians bought a lot of these back in the day. I never really understood why they didn't go over to America. You'd think it'd be the perfect marriage, you know, 4-door muscle car, but for whatever reason, the Falcon just sort of never really returned to the US once it was thrown out in 1970 in its new muscle car clothing. They sort of left that market open to the Dodge Charger, which actually sold pretty well as far as I'm aware, so yeah, not quite sure what went on with that. Anyways, as far as the Falcon goes, it's solid, if slightly lethargic. It is an older car, it doesn't have all that much power for a muscle car, 268 horsepower. Maybe you could spruce this thing up with a supercharger or two, but yeah, overall, it's a solid platform, certainly, and if this is the basis you want to make for a tuner car, this is an excellent platform. Again, rear-wheel drive, it's not too old, V8 engine in the front, perfect. I really like it as a car, although, again, I think it definitely does have some room for improvements if that's something you want to go down the route of. And finally today, the 1988 Holden Commodore Group A SV, 241 horsepower, 280 foot-pounds of 3,120 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful, the least torquey, and the lightest car we have here today, which isn't hugely surprising considering it is the oldest. I know I'm stretching the definition of modern muscle cars with a 1988 Holden, but I mean, look at it, it's awesome, it's cool, it's got a ridiculous body kit from factory. How can you not love the Group A SV? One of the most desirable Commodores in the world. Yeah, people know the Group ASV for its ridiculousness. It's not quite as ridiculous as the HSV GTS, which I adore, but it's still pretty cool. I really do rather like it. As far as it goes to drive, this one's always been a bit of a weird one. In Forza 6, this was a rather strangely excellent driving car. When it comes to this game, I've got it written down as the Falcon, but worse. It's more lethargic. It also has bigger issues. It understeers slightly more, the brakes aren't quite as good, it body rolls a little bit more, it isn't quite as quick. In essence, it does just drive like a slightly worse version of the Falcon, however, you sort of have to forgive it. I guess it feels slightly less heavy, but really not by much, and considering the weight difference is over 500 pounds lighter, maybe you'd expect a bit more from it, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles on that one. As far as we go to the times then, the quickest car of the day was the Ford Mustang RTR Spec 5 road car, going into 142nd place with a 121.448, goes in between the newer Cadillac CTS-V and the Ferrari 612 Scaglietti, not far off the pace of a Charger SRT Hellcat, and it's actually quicker than a Challenger SRT Hellcat, interestingly enough. In 154th place we find the Cadillac CTS-V Coupe with a 122.135. It's actually quicker than an M5 and an M4, which I really was not expecting from the Cadillac. It didn't drive nearly as well as that, but that's the time it's got. That engine must have made up for some of the slack. In 172nd place we have the Dodge Challenger SRT8 with 122.760. It is incredibly lucky to have that time because it was running 124s, 123s, and then just the final lap, for whatever reason, it went a second quicker and did that. So yeah, Challenger not hugely consistent. Moving down the board some more, in 191st place we find the Chevrolet Camaro 35th anniversary one with a 123.928, a incredibly quick time considering the car, but again, weird Chevy syndrome. And in 196th place we find the HSV Commodore GTS with 124.243. Interestingly, it is 2,000th of a second off a Chrysler 300C SRT8, which is actually really interesting, although it's not that much quicker than a Lotus Carlton, something to keep in mind. In 277th place we find the Ford Falcon GT with a 128.192, goes in between a Focus RS and a Golf R32. It is quicker than a Dodge Charger, an older Charger obviously, Dodge Dart, Chevrolet Camaro IROC. Yeah, not a bad time overall. In 314th place we find the Holden Commodore Group A SV with a 129.761, goes in between a Firebird Trans Am and a Mercury Cougar Eliminator, which is interesting because the Cougar has a lot more power than that, so there you go. At least the chassis is a bit more sophisticated than that. And finally today, unsurprisingly, in 393rd place we find the Ford Crown Victoria 135.318. It is quicker than a Nissan 240SX, so if you get into a police pursuit between a Nissan 240SX and a Ford Crown Victoria, you better hope that you can drive slightly better than the Crown Victoria driver. There's a little bit of consumer advice for you. Despite that, the Crown Victoria has my heart. I really like that car, and I don't know why. But as far as the best thing here today, I mean, the Camaro was the most surprising, but again, Chevy syndrome, perhaps not too surprising. The RTR Spec 5 is probably the best all-round car, and probably the most interesting out of everything here today. So there you go. Thank you all very much for watching. Next time, we are going to be taking a look at a little bit of a special episode celebrating about 3 decades of one of the world's most famous sports cars. So join us for that. Until then, keep an eye out for the Rivals episode following this, where we take a look at a famous Aussie showdown. And yeah, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, a farewell.